Hi, this is Richard again. It's now June 2021, so still having lockdowns. That gives me time to do a bit of maintenance. This is my first engine. It's the Stainz model, which I've converted to DCC last year. There's a couple of things I want to change. There's a firebox light and the fire door light are not, the LEDs are not working. I want to put screws in the floor so that I can secure the crew and they don't keep coming out. I've tried blue tack and so on, no good, and I want to be able to remove them, so I think a screw through the floor into their feet or mounting plate will fix that. I also want to put a little servo in so that the driver can follow the direction of travel. The Decoder Pro people have added that in on the ESU V4 decoder, so I should be able to do that now. This has got a V4 decoder when I bought it a year ago. That's what was available. So a few things to do, and I'm also going to modify the lights. I've modified this engine so it's got a tail light on the front, if you can see that there. I've added a little light there which has got a red LED in it, so when the loco's in reverse that comes on. It's attached to the rear headlight, and I've got another one on the back of the loco, so that comes on when the front headlight is on. But I'm going to take those off that circuit and put them on the separate circuit so I can control them separately, and perhaps use a dish light feature to have that flashing. So a bit of mucking around. So first things first, we've got to disassemble it again, and it's absolutely chock full of wires now, but we'll disassemble it and see what's not working with those lights, and maybe tidy up the wiring a bit. Okay, so get started with the disassembly. Okay, the first two screws are on each side of the frame, and they screw this little black plastic bracket on here, and the screw comes up underneath. There's one on each side, so that's the first one, and that's screwed through under there, and I've undone that and that's already come out. And there's one on the other side, and very difficult to see. There we go. So I've got those both undone, and once that's done, this little black bracket is loose, and you can get that down out of the way without removing any of the motion. Now with this work, I've been able to do all the work without disassembling this detailed valve gear, so that will still apply. I'm not going to start taking it apart. Okay, now on to the next screw. So we've moved the two screws holding the bracket on at the front. Just try and show where I'm looking at here. That bracket under there, that's the first two. Now the next four screws, two pairs, two under the spring of the rear coupler and two under the spring of the front coupler. Okay, getting this screw out from underneath the coupler. You might push the, right, that's come undone. You push the spring to one side so you can see them. There's the next one there. And now I've got to do the two at the front here. I'll just turn off while I do that. So I've now got the 4 springs out, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear. Now you don't move the centre spring, which is the centre screw, which is holding the coupler spring in position. Although in this case, this front spring is broken. So in my case, I'll take the centre screw out, and I can take the spring out, which I'll have to replace. Now that's the centre screw, different screw, and the spring. See, the top part's broken off. Yeah, so what I'm doing is, as I go, I'm taking the screws and putting them on a piece of paper, sticky taping it all down. So I've got a record of what I'm doing when I come to putting them all back. And I'll put that one there. So that's from underneath the hook spring. This is the spring centre. Okay. Now the body shell and the top plate should come away from the motor block. Here it goes. You can see that all the red chassis starts to come out from the wheels and the motor block. There she comes. See, that's coming out. The because I've got a different chimney, that couplings come through, and the we're only held together by the 4 wires to the motor block, and that comes to a plug, which is just unplugged. So there's the motor block. And there's the chassis. And up inside there is the decoder and all the wiring. Okay, let's see where we go next. So put that to one side, and the motor block. So hopefully you won't need to touch that. So next step is to remove the chimney, and the chimney is secured at the bottom with this large hex nut, and there's wires come out of the chimney through the bottom through the nut. So to ease that nut off without hurting the wires, it's the wires for the smoke, of course. So I've got the nut off now, and I've just slid that back out of the way. Normally you could disconnect the smoke wires and take the chimney out, but we can't do that yet because the chimney's wired into the decoder, and that's all under there. So in order to be able to disconnect those wires from the decoder, I've put a little plug here, which I can screw the wires in from the chimney. So now I have to undo that, and the two wires from the smoke come out, and we should be able to take the chimney right out. Not losing the nut, of course. So any plug or fitting you have on there must fit through the nut, so that's why you've got a little bit of limitation. So the chimney then can come out with its wires, and that releases the headlight, of course. So the headlight's wired in. So we've got those bits to keep to one side, and now we'll do the next step. Next bit to come off is this little plastic base plate here, and that's got 4 plastic tubes, 2 on each side, running down from the motor, from the boiler, and there's 2 on each side, and they pop into this fitting fairly firmly, but you can wiggle them around and they'll come out. And you've got some on the other side as well. So it's just a press fit. That should pop out. There we go. It's out there. So yeah, I've cut a hole in the side of that one there, a little slot, so that the wires to the headlight can go through to the tail light. That's there. And then also on there, on the boiler, there's this water filling tube on each side, and that connects the boiler and the chassis as well. So you can just pull that out carefully, and I think we're ready to go. Now there's 4 screws to remove to get into the get the cab off. There's 2 there and 2 there. Not the ones under the steps, they stay on, but these 2 on each side. So we'll get those off. Right, so once that's done, the floor comes out. And the again, so that I can, because of this red light on the front which comes through here, I need to be able to disconnect that to get the floor out. So I've got a little 2-pin plug on that. As you'll see, I've done everything with the plugs, so that frees that up. So that's the type of little computer plugs I'm using to secure those. So that comes out, the floor comes off. Now we're getting closer to the works. So that's the plug which goes into the motor block. That's the standard plug that I've 4-pin plug which I've wired to the decoder, and all these other fittings are to the well, that's to the headlight, that's the smoke, and this one here has all the lights at the rear of the loco. We've still got to get the boiler off so we can see the decoder and the wiring. So you've got to take the ballast weights out, one on each side, and I wrote on each one which is the left, which is the top, which is the inside, because, you know, hard to work out where they go when they go back. So better to write on them. So that comes off. Now there's one more piece, and that's this little safety valve cover. So that pulls forward and then you should be able to get it out. I've mangled the upper fitting a little bit, so it's quite loose, so that comes out there. And now we're about ready to get the boiler off. So that comes down here, and the boiler fits in the, just press fit in here, and there's lugs on each side. Okay, it's quite difficult to see, but the section with the boiler now comes out. The back plate here and the firebox inside, that stays there. The piece with the boiler comes out. You've got to wiggle it to one side and then the other side, and it comes out like that. And so you've got the wiring inside the firebox. That's about the only place for any wiring, and then the wires go down inside the boiler where the decoder is, and we'll see that in a moment. So that's coming out now, and with the way I've set that up, I can now unplug this one here, which is most of the wiring inside, and this plug here, which is the most of the wiring, well, different lot of wiring. So that's now separated the decoder and the boiler from the cab. Now we're getting to the end. The next step is to take the air pump off the side of the motor with one screw. Put that to side, not losing the screw. And now the base plate comes out. It just fits on either side with a lug, which, so you just push it out, push the side of the boiler apart, one side then the other, and the base plate comes out. There's the lug forward and aft and both sides. So that's the bottom, comes out now. And then underneath you'll see the ballast weight. Yeah. Oops. Okay, as you'd expect, the weight and the decoder wouldn't come out because there's two screws in the bottom. Two screws in the bottom of the weight which go up into the top of the boiler. So you need to remove those two screws, and then be careful of the headlight wire which sticks up through the chimney. That will come out. Now that's a lot of the original ballast. I'll move that over a little bit. When I fitted the decoder I had to cut about that much off, about 8mm all the way down from the back all the way down to the front, to get room for the decoder, which has this board here for the soldering, and then that connects onto the decoder itself, which is on top. So that's about that. And the other thing here is I've got in here the keep alive, the ESU keep alive, and the wires for that, and again a plug to fit to connect, so I can unplug, take the boiler top away and just work on the decoder. That's welcome back. I spent quite a few hours yesterday doing lots of little bits and pieces and thinking about how things are going to work, so I'll show you the results. First of all, got my head. Here's the crewman. It only comes with one crew normally, but I think they should have two. Usually there's 3 or 4 in the cab. So I've put him in there. That's where he normally goes, but I've put a screw through the base, and just see it there, just a self-tapping screw, and then cut the top of the screw off so it's not too high. Not the decoder itself, but the board which goes under it, and I've taken it off removed it from where it was glued down. Normally it's glued down in that position, upside down. Well, not upside down, it's glued down like that, and the decoder goes on top. But I've taken it off because it's easier to do the soldering underneath on all the soldering pads. So when part of getting that off was the front and rear tail lights. I've disconnected those from the headlights and I've soldered them on separately on auxiliary 6. That's the bottom one there on the screen, the purple one. That's auxiliary 6, which I used before, and auxiliary 7 for the other light. That's the that orange one to the right, the rightmost orange one. Looks quite big, but it's not, because I'm quite close in. It's fairly thin wire. Just on the subject of wire, nowadays I'm using this 16-strand computer cable, and it's so you get a good range of colours, and you can easily separate the strands or use them joined together. So I find that's quite good, and the cost for a metre is pretty reasonable. So also what you can see, I've also added on here 3 new wires. So that's ground +5 and impulse 1, and that's going to drive the servo that I'm going to put in. So the servo is here. Looks again big, but it's not very big compared to my hand. I've shortened the cable because it comes with about a foot of cable, so I've shortened that down. Put a 3-pin plug so I can disconnect it, because that'll be glued into the cab and I want to be able to get it off. So that's the other end of that cable, which ends up here. Also on there I said that the firebox door and the firebox flicker were not working, and so I've had to redo those. That's the top white one there, you can see is auxiliary 1. That had come unsoldered, or the wire had broken off. And auxiliary 2, well, that was still connected. Where it went into the pin here, the plug, the insert, the wires soldered onto a tiny metal spring which goes down into that hole, inside the plug into the hole. So that had come loose. So that was why those two functions were not working. And when I tested them with a 12 volt DC, the lights were working. So that should be that fixed. So so that's done. All the other lights have been checked, and the two tail lights are on the independent circuit, auxiliary 6 and 7, or function output 6 and 7, and those three wires there, they're activated by function 9, though they're not actually connected to the aux9 point. When you're using that function as a servo, you use those sockets there. So there's servo 1 at the top, and those 3 pins for servo 7 at the bottom, just there. So that's about it. That's the servo. Now the driver, yes. The poor driver, I had to make some alterations because the servo box takes the place of his legs, and he'll that's him now, and he's going to fit on top of that servo, and he'll fit glued down onto that little white arm which goes backwards and forwards. Now these little servos move through 180 degrees, or maximum of 180 degrees, and the speed can be controlled. So again, with the ESU servo functions, which Decoder Pro also supports. This last one I did on my other engine, I plugged it in, set some parameters, worked first time, so that's easy. So he's just, I've moved his arm closer to his body so there's room in the cab when he turns around. I've got to make sure his head doesn't hit the speaker, but that's why I haven't glued it in yet. So I glued the speaker on the floor that goes up there. I've ground away that base, or that edging of the base where the servo's got to go, so approximately there. On the Stainz, the doors don't open, they're fixed on this model anyway, so that's not a problem. I've just got to get it in, and I think I'll assemble it all and then get it working, and then position it, and then I'll just glue the servo down onto the floor, and that should be about it. Oh yes, another thing I was going to mention, when I fitted the decoder in, I had to cut away quite a bit of the ballast weight which went along there, and those bits that I cut off I've stuck into spare spaces in the motor block. So there's 2 pieces of the weight plus some other fishing sinkers that I've put in there, another bit there, and there's another 2 or 3 under the I'm not sure what you call that, but it's below the smoke box there, where the steam chest is, I suppose. So I fitted the weight in, the weight that was cut off, I fitted it in everywhere I can imagine, and I've added a bit more. So there's another significant size piece in there. next to the plug. So that's about it. I'll go and start assembling and we'll see how it all works. Cheers. Hi, welcome back. Been quite a while since I last videoed because a lot's been happening and not happening. So when I stopped last time, I had the decoder in, but wasn't working properly. So I looked around at the wiring, changed. Thought, oh, there maybe there's a couple of shorts, and I tidied up the wiring a bit and didn't succeed. And while I was trying to work out what was wrong, without using the program track, I got some smoke out of the decoder, and I can see two of the little pieces on the decoder had holes in them. So I got a new decoder, and this one is version 5. It was version 4 before. Now this is version 5 L, DCC only model, so it doesn't have M4 and all those other things. It came with a new adapter board, but which is the same as the old one. So I moved all the wiring to the new adapter board, being very careful with the soldering, and things are going well now. Some of the wiring tidied up a little bit. It might not look like it from there, but it's been redone. Some loose pins in the plugs, unfortunately, come out once they've been used a couple of times or resoldered a couple of times. What I have done is got a new soldering station, which is a temperature controlled one. So rather than adjusting the power supply to the soldering station, the knob turns the temperature, and it then reads the temperature back from the soldering iron so that you get it accurate. It's very quick to heat up and cool down, and gives you a good action. But what I have found, with some research, is that it's very important to clean the tips. But the important thing, which I've now realised, is that whenever you use it or finish using it, you dip it in the flux and clean it with the brass wire and the wet sponge. Make sure it's clean, dip it in the flux to clean it, and then put some solder on the tip before you put it away. You should do that when you put it away, or even if you're not soldering for 15 minutes or something, so in between work. And so clean, fresh solder, and that way the tip is maintained, and when you use it and with a bit of solder on the tip, it rapidly conducts into the whatever you're soldering and melts it. And instead of having to hold the soldering iron on the piece of work, particularly an item which has been soldered before or like a year ago, and you're trying to resolder it, you've got to have that good tip to get it to work. Otherwise you can be heating and you end up melting something without actually melting the solder, and that's what I found I had done in a couple of spots. So new soldering station, resolder all the wires onto the new board, and do it quite carefully as much as possible. So that's ready. I've tested all the wires that are coming out for all the lights and the functions, except for the smoke unit is not working, and I'm waiting for a new one to come through, but I'll reassemble everything without the smoke. I've tested everything I can, but in order to test the start voltage and max voltage and all the back EMF and the chuffs. The engine has to be moving, so I've got to reassemble it so I can put it on the track. As I said, the two engineers are there in position with screws in their feet, and everything else is pretty right to go. Yeah. Oh yes, one thing. With the change from the V4 to the V5, if you're familiar, the V4 has an external power pack, which I had previously mounted inside the dome. But the version 5 comes with its own power pack, or keep alive, and that's those two green capacitors. So with that there, I've taken the power pack out of the inside of the dome, which is there, and I've put 5 10-gram fishing sinkers in there and glued it in with some insulation tape and hot glue. So that's all in there. So that's another 50 gram of weight over the driving wheels, so there's a little bit of help. So that's what's happening. So I'll start with the reassembly. Here's the ballast weight from the inside the boiler, but that's the front where the chimney goes through. When I put the decoder in the first time, I cut off the ballast along there, and the pieces I've put in the motor block underneath. So that's ready to go back on. I'll use a bit of tape underneath to double-sided sticky tape to secure it in place and get that down. There it goes. So I'm going to get that in position. So most of the wires come out the back, which goes to into the cab or into this firebox. So they'll have to come along there. So that does that fairly well. I think I might put some insulation tape across there to keep everything a little bit shielded in case of loose wires. And of course, before I do that, I actually put the decoder into position now that it's all ready. Make sure it goes around the right way. There's more pins on this side than in this side, and you'll find there's no matching holes there if you get it around the wrong way, but it will go in the wrong way, so don't do that. So that's going in firmly down. Alright, I'll just get some masking tape or some insulation tape. Okay, just put some insulation tape across the top of the decoder, and a little bit here where there's wires are there. So I don't want to wrap it all up because you're not supposed to get it too hot. So that's done. The next thing is to put it in the boiler with those two screws. So I've got the decoder and on the adapter board, and that's on top of the weight, which is underneath now. So we're looking at the bottom of the boiler, and you've got to tuck all the wires in so they don't stick out the bottom here, because the plate that goes on the bottom of the boiler is in there. And don't forget to get the headlight wire out. So hopefully I've got that all done. Screws goes in there. That's one of the screws in the bottom of the weight, bottom of the ballast. There is another one up here, but if you've cut the top off the ballast, like I have, it doesn't actually go into anything, it doesn't hold. So I'll try leaving that out. So that's all done. All the wires are coming out this end, ready to go to the different destinations inside the loco, apart from the headlight. It's 19 different wires on the decoder, so that's why there's not a lot of room in there and things get tangled. But that's how we go. Alright, now this plate goes in next, which is the bottom of the boiler, and it's got two lugs at this end. This is the firebox end here, so that should go on there with a bit of luck. And just clicks into position on both sides, and that's looking good. So at this end it matches up along there, and that end's clicked in, so that's done. Alright, next step then is we can put that little pump back on, which you've carefully put aside and saved with its screw, and that can go on. Get the right way round. I think it goes on that way. So it goes on one way because it's got one screw hole and one lug. That's on there too. Now that's actually holding that bottom plate on, so I suppose you could put it on later, but that holds it together. Okay, the next step then is joining the cab onto the firebox. So before we do that, I'll join up the plugs that go into the cab. So there's the LEDs for the better light. LEDs for the fire door and the smoke box, firebox flicker. The wires going to the back for the rear headlight, the rear tail light, sorry. All the existing wires for the cab light and the rear headlight go up the back of the go up here and then across the back, so they're all in there. So now, having labelled everything carefully, we can connect those on. Around the right way, yes. Yeah, okay. First plug's on. That's plug number 1. See by the labelling. Plug number 2. That's the only 4-pin plug, so it does help. That's a 6-pin to 4-pin. So there's 10 wires that go to the cab for all those cab functions. Plus this one, which is for the servo. That can go on later. Okay, so all the wires and the plugs have to squeeze in here under the firebox once it's in, but we can place it in position now. So there's the ring around the top of the boiler there, and that goes into the matching ring inside the front edge of the cab. bear with me. Yes, no, yes, no. Okay. So that just wiggles up once you're in position. That locks on. Actually, it is confusing because there's a ledge or a proud piece across the front of the cab, and that's what slips into the groove on the back of the boiler. There's also a piece at the rear of the smoke box and all that fitting, but that's not the one that joins on here. So that's gone in and clicked into position. So that's in too. So we now progress to the next step. Okay, well, the boiler is in the firebox, joined onto the firebox there, and it's clicked into position. All the cables are under the firebox there, and that's all you can, the only space you've got. You can't put them under the boiler because the under the boiler is hollow. Well, it's not, it's open to be seen, so you can't use that space, and the boiler's full of lead. So you could get some cables down through here, but again that fitting there is up against the bottom of the weight. So with some drilling you might be able to do something. And the chimney hole there, of course, is occupied by the chimney, so you might get some thin wires down there. One thing to be careful of is to make sure that this wire to the existing front headlight comes up. It goes along the side through a groove and then up the front of the weight. If you don't get it, the wire coming up through at the front, then it fills in, it's occupying the space in the chimney. Now where the chimney goes down, it's a square section, so it uses that whole square space that you can see, so you've got to get that out of the way. So I think it took me a couple of goes, which I didn't film, but I've got that through. So careful putting it back on, or more specifically pulling it off, because you've got to get it out of there. If you're pulling it out again, you've got to get it out of there, and you've got to pull the body, or the body there of these two sections away from this piece, these lugs here to pull it out. So you need to put the pressure on here to get that out. Don't pull here because that will come undone. I've already glued it once. That corner, that's that piece, and that piece are separate and not supposed to come undone, so you can glue it back, which I will do. So that's that stage. Now I can't put it down very easily because these pipes here are fixed. I've got two mountings, so they're fixed in position. The Westinghouse pump can go back on now. It's not in the way, but I'll leave that till after, so I don't bump it or whatever. And this safety valve piece that goes on the front of the cab, that could go back on, but I'll leave that until later. Okay, so everything's ready down to that level. So now we're to put the floor back underneath the cab and the boiler. So I've got the floor here with the driver and the fireman ready. The driver's on his little servo there. You can put the figures in later, but then you've got to try and poke them in through the window, and the door doesn't open in the cab. So I think it's probably better to try and do it as is. Right, so now before you put the floor on, the ballast weights have to go back in. So they're only go in one position. So I've marked them very carefully, which is the top and the bottom, and which is the right hand side, and so on. So that's the top there, so it goes in that way, and that's the right hand inside, so that goes, yeah, confusing, so that's the right hand side up there, so that goes in like that, because it has to go round that screw mounting point. So once you've got one in, the other one follows pretty obviously. But you don't forget to do those, or you have to take it all apart again. Right, now before we go, we've got to plug in the servo. That will go in there, and that will come up through the floor there. Hopefully. This is the first time it's gone on. Alright, so we've got all the other wires there. The crew and the driver go in. You always need 3 hands here, 3 or 4 hands. As you start to go in, those copper pipes down the side, they've got to go in through those holes in that little deck there. So that's another hand to get that into position. Okay, one's in. The other one's got to go in there. Right, so those two are in. I'm going to turn it over again. Make sure everything else is out of the way. So that's going to come out of there, that's out of there. So all the wiring has to come out of the way of the floor when it goes into position. Now that goes up inside that, so it's almost in. Right, driver's just come out because he's only a pressed fit. The new wires going to the rear tail light there, they're a little bit in the way of the floor. There's a raised section on the floor inside the cab, so I'm wondering if that's stopping that coming right down. That goes there. No, it's alright once it's held in. Okay, it's all in. We can ready to do the screws. As I said before, there's 4 screws. got them out of their hiding place before I started this, so I'll do that now. Okay, I've got the screws now, so those two go back in there. Wrong screwdriver, crosshead there. Remember to go anti-clockwise until it clicks, and then you screw it in so you don't destroy the thread. Now I'll drop one on the floor. I'm tempted to paint my floor white so that it makes it easier to find everything. Unfortunately that one was right in front of me. The last two of these ones which go in here under the floor. So they're just inside the rear steps. So these two here, they go later, so don't try and screw in there. Now the screws on a screwdriver is magnetic, so I can do that because the other hand's occupied. Click, and there it goes. Alright, so that's tight down there. Let's give it another turn. So we should have all the plugs available that we need. Motor block, front tail light, and the smoke. Yeah, so they're all there. Ready to plug in. Okay, we're ready for the last step now, or getting close to the last. Putting the motor block back on. So, make sure you've got the front going to the right direction. Yeah. Put that there, next to it. And a couple more plugs to put in. The most important one, of course, is the plug going to the motor block. It's the 4 wires. There used to be a little black plug which would fit onto the 4 pins, where with this motor block is a 4-wire motor block, but I melted that connector trying to solder to it before I worked out how to get the soldering iron working properly, or how to get the solder moving properly. Okay, so one more connector. This is for the front tail light. I've got two 2-pin connectors here now. Probably could rearrange that. So that's marked. So that one's for the front tail light, which is there. The other one is for the smoke, which I haven't got connected at the moment. And the motor block and that's all done. Alright, so that's ready. Now we do have to do one thing more, which is to put the chimney on and screw that down. So I'll do that now. Okay, so I've got the front headlight and the chimney with the screw with the bolt on the end. So take that off for a second. Now this one, it's 18 volt, but it's one of the ones which has this heating element inside the chimney, about there, with two wires that come out the hole at the bottom of the plastic chimney. So that's plastic all up there. Two wires come out. Unfortunately, this smoke unit has given up the ghost. It's probably 10 or 20 years old anyway, yes. So it's given up the ghost. I've ordered a new one, but it hasn't arrived yet. So I'm going to put the chimney back in without the wires. And I can easily get into this point later and install that and connect that up. So I'll just put that on there for now. So the other piece that has to go on there is the headlight, and the headlight goes on to the chimney, and then the chimney goes down through the hole, and you've got to get that wire out of the way. It's not quite out of the way. There it goes. Right, into position. And then the light goes up into the bottom. That's the original globe out of the headlight. I could replace that, but that works fine, gives a nice light. Okay, so that's on. Then in the bottom you've got this black plastic cover, and these, when we get to it, these pipes go in. In fact, I should put them in now. That one's got to go in the front hole. And that one can go in there. That's a bit more flexible. You can do that one after, but that's that one. And then on the other side, that one's in, and I'll get the other one, seeing I'm here. It's tucked itself up out of the way. There it comes. Not quite in. I'll put that in after. Now, so the chimney pipe's coming through the thread, and we can put the nut on the end. If the wires were coming out, you'd have to thread the wires through the nut first, but I don't have those now. And you've got to put that nut onto the end of that thread, and of course with these wires in the way, it just makes it a little bit difficult. And you can't turn the chimney because it's got the square section. Use these tweezers to get it on. Get that wire up out of the way. So it's started, just got to get it on now. The screwing down of the chimney does screw the whole thing together, so you should get it fairly tight, although not too tight because it's plastic thread. Pretty sure that's on there now and looking good. Okay, now the next step then, getting that wire out of the way. Poke it down. I've cut a little slot in that black plastic piece so it clears when it's put down. And now it's ready to go down onto the block. So those are in position. Pop this one back in. The light's so good. There it goes. So those four are in position there, and now that one's come out. That one goes back in behind the copper pipes. I've painted them all metallic. If you didn't have them painted, you probably wouldn't see that. Okay, so now that just comes down and until it's flat. So should make sure everything's out of the way. That's looking good. It should come up. Now these have to be out of the way, of course. They're the last, one of the last pieces. Put them forwards out of the way of that plate. Right, that's out of the way. If it goes in there behind the wheel, you're not going to get it down. Yeah, that one's out of the way. Well, we're on the way. I'm just going to have to double check everything. That one. They've all got to go up inside the firebox. If I just soldered it all together, it would be easier, but then you'd have to be working with all the bits all tied together by short wires. So let's have another go. one's got underneath again. Well, it's done. Just had to push the wires up a little bit more into the firebox, and the body's come down onto the chassis, onto the motor block. It's all square. It looks square instead of looking like a rack locomotive like it used to do. Alright, now last few things to do. We've got these fittings which go on the boiler, but I'll put them on last. The main thing to finish off here now is these screws underneath. So we'll have a look at those. So at this stage you should have 6 screws left. Two are for these little pieces here, which they can go in last. So the others are for under here. And double check, they should be there. There's 2 under there, 2 at the front. So I'll get those in. You've got to get the spring of the hook out of the way. So making use of the magnetism in the screwdriver might help get it in there. Straight in there. Anti-clockwise, clockwise. And the other one, next one. Hopefully you can see that. Firm, but not overly tight. Now the other 2, they go in here under the springs, the same as on either side. Now if you didn't have the front coupler, it would be easy to do that, but I've got a front coupler on there now with the hook and the spring, which is working fine, but it just goes in the same. Try and move the light a bit. And the last one. So you can see that there. So let's see the last one. Done. Now, as I said, there's last couple of screws to go. So these last 2, zoom in a bit more. This goes So there's a hole underneath where the screw goes in, comes through that hole there, that middle hole. So that has to rotate and go in behind the tank. So behind the tank in there. Right, it's down in position. So over onto the back again. And you see it's that little hole in there. There's 3 holes, but the middle one is the one where the screw goes. And you have to get it in through the rods there. Very small screws, I don't know what they are. Number 1 or something if I was trying to buy them. Counterclockwise and then clockwise. And it's in. Right, I'll just do the other one. Okay, last couple of bits. Just these 3 fittings. Okay, so this one is the water filling tube, I understand. And no, it's on this side. So the bottom one is in this large fitting here, and the top one's on the boiler. And again, that just presses in. Done. And we've got the little Westinghouse pump, or I call it Westinghouse. I think it's that's what it looks like to me. Maybe different brand. And then the screw should just go in the top. In it goes. That one's done. Now the last one is this little steam pipe. It's something to do with the safety valve. So you push in the bottom. It's the hole just behind the bell. So that should come down into there, and then it should go into the little hole on the front of the cab. There it goes. Okay, so now put it on the track and see if it's functioning. Okay, I've done all the physical stuff to the engine, all the wiring and reassembly, apart from putting the new smoke unit in. Everything's done, but of course the work's not finished. So I've already done some work on the decoder, installing the sound and sound slots and the function mapping and everything that I've done, but we now come to the testing. So I'm using Decoder Pro and to do the programming. So I'll just start that up, and these are all the tabs, the different parameters that are on the can be programmed. So it takes a while to set up. If you want to change it, you can use it whatever your dealer's done, but I've got my own settings. But the main thing to do is I just use the basic one, and the first time I've tested anything, I just make sure that I can read from the loco. Yeah, you can hear it reading. That's Decoder Pro reading the CVs from the loco. So that means the loco's decoder's talking through the track, and we can go to the next step. So I'll minimise that window and open the throttle. So the light function I use to turn on the sound. Bell's going. It's the horn, that's good. Or the whistle. And I've got Australian whistle on as well. So doing this to show there is a problem. So that indicates that all the motor settings are not correct. The back EMF, the start voltage, the chuffs and so forth are not set up. So that's the next step, and then things should be good. Okay, speed step 1. So we can see that now we've got the loco moving smoothly, that the chuffs are not right. So we need to alter the chuff spacing at speed step 1, and I'll do that using Decoder Pro here. So this is chuff spacing at speed step 1, and then you can go to a higher speed and check that the spacing is still correct. So you alter that gear ratio, if you like, with that parameter, and then you go to full speed and see if the chuffs are too close, and if they're too close at your full speed, you can decrease it or increase the gap with that parameter. I'll also set CV5, which is the top speed, so I don't like them to roar around the track at a scale 120 kilometers per hour. So I'll bring CV5 down so that it does about 60-70 k, or maybe even 50 k for this one, just what looks natural. Sound, speed step 1. Looks about right. Okay, so now we go to speed step 4. Let's see how it looks then. Okay, so speed step 1. So 4 chuffs per rev. Okay. So now go to speed step 4. So it's not quite as many chuffs as there should be theoretically, but it doesn't sound too unnatural for that low speed. Don't want to have too many chuffs for the low speed. Let's speed up to half speed. Speed step 14. Yeah, not too bad. So you probably don't want it to sound faster than that. Yeah, it's not too bad for top speed. Sounds about right. So that's the chuff settings. I'll set the top speed when it's out on the track and see it's a bit more natural, measure that. So pretty well done. Everything's working and the sound's adjusted, the functions, everything's pretty right. I can't think of anything more to do now apart from put the smoke in when I get it and give it a try on the track. So that's it for now then. I'll just turn the sound off so I can hear you. You can hear me. So everything's pretty well set up, and the functions, the driver, stuff like that's all working pretty well. So the renovation, serious renovation with the new decoder, but it's all looking good. So look up my channel on YouTube and send me a message if you've got any queries, and I'll post some more stuff as I think it's worthwhile. Cheers. See ya.